Are we good to start? All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the finals of the Penang Debate Championship 2017. Round of applause, please. All keep stepping here. My name is Enting, and I'll be judging the round. With me are Benjamin, Amja, Justin, and Wesley. We're all very excited to be here. In opening government, we have Mara B. In opening opposition, Xing Lian Kuai Le. In closing government, Taylor's FJ. And in closing opposition, Hammy's. Right, without further ado, I'd like to invite the Prime Minister to give a speech not exceeding 7 minutes. Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, the tinders of the past are fires waiting to be erupted by staring down at a monument, ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder of the historical oppression that you faced in the past. The interpretations of monuments that say nothing but stare down back at you, ladies and gentlemen, can be interpreted by only the power structures that be, and subsequently, ladies and gentlemen, oppressed when they were originally intended to help. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, we must eliminate all and not remain for some or allow for all on that side of the house, ladies and gentlemen. We think that's important. I will deal with 4 arguments in my speech. The first is, why is it that we believe that if we allow even some to exist, ladies and gentlemen, the ones that will exist are the ones that will be oppressive? Secondly, I'll talk about how do we find meaning in the ones that we do allow to exist, and why is it that people that will control the meaning of said structures will be harmful to those most vulnerable. Thirdly, ladies and gentlemen, why these are monuments are painful reminders of historical oppression. And lastly, why allows for people to unjustifiably utilize it in order to consolidate political power and to consolidate away from criticism. The first thing, ladies and gentlemen, is in regards to why is it that we allow for even some, and this is assuming that opposition wants to keep the good ones and get rid of the bad ones, ladies and gentlemen. Why is it that we don't think that this will occur? That first and foremost, that it is circumstantial on the political mood of those countries and the political powers at play that determines what kind of political monuments are built in that circumstance. And you need to note that also at the same time, that the kind of majorities that we're talking about, oftentimes, that you will need majorities that are sympathetic to minority causes, feel like, secondly, that they want to take blame and ownership over the historical oppression that occurred in the past, take blame that they took part in some degree of that particular circumstance later, or take blame that in the past their ancestors, who they don't know, ladies and gentlemen, translated their blame right now in this particular circumstance as well. That means you force individuals to confront and uptake a moral guilt on the part of those individuals that don't feel they have anything to do with it and feel that they have some kind of reparations, whether hard, soft, or moral, ladies and gentlemen, in this circumstance to pay. Which is why, when political powers at play want to determine what kind of monuments you want to build, you get less certainty that you will build Harriet Tubman in this circumstance, and more likely that you'll have to build, for example, General Custer that beat down all the Native Americans in this circumstance because he was a hero, ladies and gentlemen. So you need to prove to us on the opposition bench what kind of political powers at play forces the majority at hand, ladies and gentlemen, to build political monuments that will be in the position to help individuals that are least in power in this circumstance. We think that's exceptionally important. It is much easier on the converse to fight the argument that a clean slate, that no monuments exist, that we don't build visceral images on either side, ladies and gentlemen. We don't force you to confront, and we will not build monuments on our side to help our causes, to say we'll just move past it and say we will only discuss black and white, in sober discussions around history, in academia, and things like that, ladies and gentlemen. Those are less emotional conversations, those are a lot less interpretive conversations, and less political conversations, ladies and gentlemen. That's why a clean slate, where everyone abolish it, is a lot more strategic in comparison. Before I go on, I'll be opening the shop.
So let me get it straight. You're okay with at least still having references to these monuments or the events that transpired them in historical textbooks in the academia?
So, I mean, like, we like history books and they'll refer to historical events. We just don't want monuments. That's not common. Guys. Secondly, yeah, I bet you do, but no. But secondly, is in regards to the meaning in regards to those monuments. We think that intentions in building monuments don't matter. It is how people interpret those monuments that matter, ladies and gentlemen. And the reason why this is important is because even though you might build an indigenous tribute to the indigenous community, that was intention to be a commemoration to the beauty and our remorse and our imperialist nature towards indigenous communities in the past, because of the nature of majorities in not wanting to take up blame in the past, ladies and gentlemen, it is more likely that individuals that own pop culture, media, social norms, and cultures in society can likely pervert meaning when it comes to these monuments as well. And that same indigenous community structure can be seen as the look at the savages that we say, that when they look at the contorted faces of the Maori on top of a monument, look at the barbarians that we defended ourselves against in the past. It is so easy to change and manipulate and pervert meaning to display the exact opposite of the intention that those monuments were built in this particular circumstance. And the problem is those minorities have absolutely no power to control this very visceral, interpretive monuments in those circumstances. We think that's harmful. Thirdly, we think these are monuments that reinforce historical oppression as well. That road statues in South Africa, that in Oxford as well, that when you build monuments of the warriors in the Confederacy that fought and succeeded against the people that were trying to take away our states' rights, aka slavery, ladies and gentlemen, in those particular circumstances, serve as a constant daily reminder to the African Americans that live in those cities of the slavery and oppression, that your state is proud of your generals as well as the people involved in those circumstances, to glorify them, ladies and gentlemen, in public spaces, to say that you are worth less. That contributes more to the kind of things that happen in status quo, where people who are white feel like it is okay to treat African Americans as less because of the subliminal, visceral imaging that these monuments create, ladies and gentlemen. Or that African Americans feel that they are worth less in these particular circumstances, not coming out to vote because they don't know what to do, not engaging the political process because they feel that they are worthless and not appreciated by a state that endorses the kind of slavery and historical oppression that once was opposed against them in the past, ladies and gentlemen. We think that's important to consider the principal harm of pain that these individuals suffer, but also the practical implications of discouragement that these individuals face as well. But lastly, ladies and gentlemen, we think that, for example, parties like the ANC piggyback on pictures as well as monuments of Nelson Mandela, for example, or your Lee Kuan Yew for Singaporeans out there, to say that you have the political power to invoke things like colonial heroes, ladies and gentlemen, in order to deflect criticism of the now, ladies and gentlemen, to justify corruption as well as things that are happening right now, to stymie any sort of political opposition as well, to make people enemies of the state, to say, are you going against our independent sovereign right now? Because we were the ones that brought you independence in this area. That can only be done through the invocation of Nelson Mandela. You can have Netanyahu stand in front of a war memorial invoking the pain of Israelis lost during the 6-day war and say we need to expand further into Palestine, invoking those emotional arguments, all the same nature. Those political arguments are interpretive, dangerous, ladies and gentlemen, and also controlled by the majority. History books are discussed in sober rooms by people in academia, discussed where it's black and white. We can converge on those things, hold those things accountable. Things in the media and things in people's minds are not. Thank you.
Great. I thank the Prime Minister for that speech and call for the Leader of Opposition here. If we ban monuments, we stand to lose the one visceral reminder we have of the histories we cannot escape and stories we cannot rewrite.
Whilst I agree with the Prime Minister that it's open to interpretation, a world with less monuments or no monuments is a world where that goes unopposed and harder to fight. The position of the open opposition is quite simple. We are not going to defend some monuments, we are going to defend all monuments. Memorials that defend murals, memorials that support resistance movement and colonial periods, monuments that celebrate colonial masters, we will defend. But we say the principle of the opposition is that we must have history represented as it is on every single corner of our world, because we cannot lie to ourselves and pretend like academicians are the ones we must agree to. I have 3 things in responses to the speaker before me before I go to my material. First, according to the speaker before me, existing power structures means the creation of this monument is almost always oppression related rather than is resistance or good in this world. This is untrue for 2 reasons. First, in a vast amount of context where there is post-war colonial periods or there's post-ethnic violence, oftentimes there are monuments resurrected as a result of peace agreements or the fact that minority individuals come to terms with the fact that there should be some blame attributed to majority governments. This is true in Rwanda. This is true in parts of colonial parts of Africa that were colonized by the Belgians. So I'm unsure why it means some monuments having oppressive structures means all of them are not inherently good. So I would reject that premise in the opening. But the second premise they had was the intentions of building this monument matter less because interpretations are worse off. 2 responses to this. The first thing we will say is intentions matter. The fact that a whole community suffered, like in Malaysia when there were colonial periods, when individuals died fighting against like Francis Light in Malaysia or like Sir George Waterson in Singapore, meant that people died as a result of it. Literally suffered today because of oppressive structures. I think intentions matter. Don't lie and say they don't. But the second thing we will say in the open opposition is interpretations get worse in your world because a monument is visceral. A monument can be understood by people on the street. It's open for debate, discussion, open to the media and the airways. Academic articles can be rewritten and justified with facts. You incentivize a world in which historical revisionism will be at a high. A world in which majority governments can deny monuments, have history books rewritten, omit facts, omit figures. That is a world in which academians will be the ones contradicting each other and average individuals don't know anything. People are not literate in half of the post-colonial states. I don't know why you expect them to engage with that discourse. But the third thing they say in the opening is, as a result of this, minority individuals don't engage in politics. African Americans suffer because they feel victimized by this figure. In a world in which you don't have figures that represent the struggle, like the Tugu Nagai represent our opposition to the British, you would have no individuals who are minority struggling and fighting for the fact they need reparations. The fact that there was a past that was so horrible that requires some addressing. Every day we trigger African Americans. Is one more day they fight for reparations that they will not in your world. Why people going to say it never actually happened? It wasn't that bad. Read a history book, you will know better. This is a world in which power structures exist, but you make those power structures harder to penetrate because you make the power lesser to the average folk. Before I go into argumentation, please.
Which one is harder to have historical revisionism? Reinterpreting the contorted face of Maori to just be a savage, or academia, which is trackable, black and white, rebuttable, as well as discussed in sober rooms where you can hold them accountable?
Here's the thing. Whilst it's true you can interpret the face of a Maori person in your world to be horrible, that face exists for people to defend. In your world, it'll be written in articles by black and white journalists that people don't understand, cannot opt into, and then there's no opposition to it. Academicians are more likely to be white. They're more likely to defend the South African government. Nelson Mandela was used by the ANC, but at least in our world, African Americans can say, that's not our Nelson Mandela. Don't lie about it. In your world, you lie and get away with it. 2 points responses in the 2 points of argumentation in the speech. First, about why we think in principle these monuments ought to exist to represent struggle. Second, I'll talk about oppressive monuments like the Cecil Rhodes one. And third, why abolishing these monuments makes things worse. First, why we think these monuments that represent struggles must exist. In principle, on the open opposition, people are victims of struggles they did not consent to. Borders in Africa were redrawn as a result of colonial past they had no control of. Half the population in parts of Africa was displaced because of their ethnic identity. I point you to Sierra Leone, I point you to parts of Belgium. This means if individuals die, and every single day they are remembrance of their ancestors that were robbed from them, and these monuments represent them, in principle, we think they must represent the struggle. Everyone in the community should feel that guilt and as a result of that struggle. But the second thing we say is these monuments that represent struggle are vital because unlike books you can close, unlike academicians who can pretend like things are wrong, a monument is there every single day that you see. This need is a better rallying point for things like reparation, for things like affirmative action. In Sri Lanka, where revisionism by the Sri Lankan government is high, the only point in which you can rally against it is by actually showing monuments where oppression was linked to it. In a world in which you didn't have this, rallying would be harder, less for the average common man that exists right now, and more in your upper echelon society. How many black people can interpret journals in the middle of Rwanda? So we think that principle, the struggle is important, but for reparations and like consolidation, it's also important. But a second, this is very interesting. Monuments about oppressive structures like Cecil Rhodes, Francis Light, I'll give it to them. They say we must bring them down because they remind us of oppression. We must remember, we cannot let individuals pretend like our historical past was done. It's not done. Until today, with British companies coming in all the time, everyone wants jobs in this country. And you don't remember our colonial past. And you don't every day remind yourself that their oppression is real. And this is the person. You literally get to look into the eyes of someone who oppressed a country. That is the most visceral reminder that oppression existed in the past. This reminder is important for two things. One, it makes it harder for majorities to get away with their guilt. In your world, a white person will say, God, sure, colonialism was bad, but it doesn't have an individual representation of it. So guilt is higher for individuals to opt into. Your white people don't have to walk every day and remember how much they owe to minority individuals. They must remember this guilt. But the second thing we say as a result of this, it's harder to lie about history. And I think a monument can be interpreted by like majority individuals, but it can also be interpreted to defend minority individuals. That's what happened in Africa, in parts of South Africa, in South Africa, where they literally were able to oppose the government by remembering about the Cecil Rhodes statue. They've got it down, unfortunately, they should have kept it, because in a world in which he was constantly there, we would constantly fight against the stupid universities that exist there. But the last thing I want to say, if you abolish horrible monuments, like Confederate monuments or monuments that represent white colonial past, you incentivize the reignition of hatred. Because not in a world in which you clamor on identities that are intrinsic and important, whether they're good or bad, this movement will be stronger, more vocal, and more extreme. This applies to both your Confederates but also ethnic minorities. Because in a world in which they're not represented, why on earth would they support your government? Why would they go for elections? They will pick up arms. In this world on the proposition, people will be silent, but they will be angry at the point at which they've gone over. There is nothing they can point to look at a happy future.
Great. I thank the Leader of Opposition for that speech and call for the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
This is a monumental debate. This is a debate on what these monuments represent, the values that they hold, and how people accept and understand these things. We have told you that people are able to use these monuments as reinforcers of historical oppression, affected political power of the oppressor. We have already told you that these things are being used to justify entrance of war, to justify hate symbols. People use monuments like Confederacy monuments to say that these people were right, that I was right to be that the Confederacy was right, that these things that these monuments within this South of the United States are often used as a rallying point for members of white supremacies, This is something that Amrit says would not happen. This is something that Amrit says would happen only when you destroy or ban these monuments, that you incentivize the reignition of hatred. But this is only true when you specifically target specific monuments. Because these people will say that they were discriminated, that they are attacking our monuments. But the difference here, note, that we are focusing on a blanket ban, that all monuments will be targeted. They can't say that we're being that will be attacking the Confederacy, where we're banning monuments for the Unionists anyway. So Amit's point on that is not true. Secondly, the ability for you to say that it's hard to lie about history. This is Amit verbatim, but apparently historians can. That you can easily lie as a historian who's backed up by your journals, who's backed up by education, who's backed up by your ethical duties, who's educated and has an actual role to ensure that as objective as possible. And what's the comparative that we bring to you? The comparative here is the media. What does the media look like? It's controlled by the authoritarian government who are more likely able to say that no, that this monument represents our power over you. That this monument represents the ability for us to say that the Confederacy was good. And that's the difference. And if Amrit was to say about the ability for a man in Congo to read a journal, Congo or Liberia or Sierra Leone, it's more likely to accept the narratives that the media makes anyway. That the harms that occurs, that what we are talking about is more likely to occur. That comparatively, these people will still see a monument based on the narrative that have been created. And that is something that's truly important. And when she was talking about how people can use these monuments to represent them and being vital, and how it means to them, is that these people who are already being controlled, who already have the narratives controlled by the media, it's more likely to believe what the media says as compared to journals, as compared to others. These things are truly important. We'll have them in our education syllabus. These things are truly important for them in policies. We already do these sorts of things in education and policies anyway. We think we do not need visual representation of what occurs before that closing.
So, like, these bigots rally around Confederate statues because they want to perpetuate this myth that they were being oppressed by the North. How will removing statues suddenly make them magically change their minds rather than making them believe that actually oppressed once again?
Look, we are not changing their minds. What we are doing is removing a visceral representation of their thoughts and actions and what they use to justify them. We have told you about how the ANC uses representations of Nelson Mandela to say that they are his successor. That Lee Hsien can use Oxley House as a representation to say that I am the successor of Lee Kuan Yew. That these things are what's allowed inside opposition. And these things especially work because a monument stands. And it stands there being seen by everyone. There's a daily reminder of what it means. There is a daily reminder for racists to interpret it as racist. That people can always think and glorify what they truly think about it. You can even see things like this in Malaysia. We have the Tugu Negara, the national statue, to commemorate our fights for independence. But the thing is, the intention here was to show that if you look at the statues, these people are white. That they can say that the whites fought for your independence, that the whites spill their blood while the Malays and the Chinese and Indians here do nothing. And that's interpretation that could exist, that has been used before. No. But this is truly important because as an icon, monuments are associated. That human thought works in a subliminal manner. That what you think and what you remember can be easily associated. This is why corporations use images to represent things like happiness or summer to sell you products. And these are things that the government, the authoritarian body can use to say that, you know what, we are okay, that we associate these things. That monuments allow you to have the same ability combined with the machinery and ability of powerful authorities. That this is how you perpetuate the level of glorification that occurs. That anyone with power at one time can assert their dominance and ideology. That Trump can build himself a monument to show how great he is, what huge hands he has. That Trump is able to do things like this. But he cannot do these things academically. He cannot do these things in textbooks because these things are made to be objective. They're made to be done with proof, with basis. Amrit cannot just tell us that historians can just lie whatever they want because they're white. Do the same thing. Historians, academia are based upon support, are based upon peer review. That if you do right, you will be attacked by your friends, you will be attacked by your colleagues. The media is not. It's based upon who controls the power, who is able to create that narrative. And who can create the narrative, the oppressors. They can say that we were right, that we were right all along. That we, as the white supremacist group in the United States, can say that the Confederacy was right. That our statue stands as a proof of that. That the monument that they want to bring is one that will work on a subliminal level, to say, will work on a subliminal level to show that these things are associated. That they can stand in front and say that we are fighting a war against the blacks because they are terrorizing us. That you enable these races to do whatever they want and say whatever they want through whatever methods they have. I think that's problematic, and that's why we propose.
Great. I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech and call for the Deputy Leader of Opposition
Before I was a funny speaker, I was an angry speaker. And I think what government said, I'm probably going to do the better. Because everything that they say, taking them at the best case, was only removal of problematic monuments. I think we'll take them at their best and we'll say, assuming every monument in the world is problematic, we'll still let them and engage with them on that. To that extent, I have one new extension on why any of your reconciliatory policy on your side will not necessarily be taken with like as much as you want. There will be distrust of the state that anything that you want won't be possible. Because you know why? We've told us the answer. They don't care about your intentions, they only care about the outcome. To these speakers out there, they don't care if you're removing all monuments. To them, you're removing my monument. And that's ultimately what gives them the rallying point of saying and going against anything that the state expects of them. Before that, a laundry list rebuttal. Because the first thing that they say is that you have historians and journals. Like the last time I checked, the historians and journals, especially if they're in like the top universities in the world, are supported by grants. And you know who gave those grants? The state. Meaning to say that under your side, even if we take it as best, all of your things are still corruptible. But even if it's a neutral person that's giving you those grants, who the hell reads your journals? They are inaccessible to most people on the ground. And you know what's accessible to people on the ground? So similar to that, drawing a parallel, you have, for example, journalists telling you why vaccination is good, telling you why necessarily climate change is real. But do people read all those stuff? No, they listen to the most easily corruptible messages that the media has. You know what changes their mind? When you give them visceral images of smallpox, visceral images of a polar bear is stranded on the left iceberg, that's what necessarily causes them to change the most. And we think that's the one that even if you can corrupt and have as many images, we can have more images on your side. That's something that you cannot have. When you remove all monuments, the most incumbent, the most insidious, asymmetrical power remains. Sit down. Lastly, we'll talk about like the, perverting the monument. So necessarily we agree that under both sides, the media corrupts. The media is apparently very corrupt. But what do you remove then? You can remove the voice, but you can't remove the rallying point that these people go to. Meaning to say that for every monument of Trump that you build, I can build a monument of a lady that you left behind. I can build a monument of a refugee. I can build a monument of someone that's affected by your climate change policies. All of this acts as counterfactuals for these people to rally around those places. Meaning to say that at least in status quo, even if the media corrupts them, like what Amrit alluded to earlier, they can say that's what the media say, but that's not what I feel of this statue. They can meet there, they constantly have solidarity meetings there, and we think that's the power that it gives to them when they're able to not constantly go there. We think that ultimately those physical representations are one that's independent from the corruption of the media, and like your media can corrupt the news, but your media can't corrupt it. You can paint it green, but you can't remove it. So we think in status quo, good. Build more monuments. If it means that you get power from those monuments, go ahead and go build more. But then the idea, the silver bullet apparently, mixed case, we have daily reminders of slavery. You know what's a daily reminder of slavery? The N-word. It all started because estate owners use the N-word to describe these individuals as people who are submissive to them, as people who they oppress. But what happened in the long run is that society is able to change those identifiers as things that oppresses them to things that bring them together. For them to be able to remind themselves that these were words they were used to oppress us, we have rose further than that. We're able to now use that as a collective point of saying what necessarily we need to change, how far we have traveled upon. This monument serves the same purpose. You may say a picture of my oppressor might anger me initially, but it's also what allows me to get together with my fellow African Americans to go out there and say, this is what oppressed me, I am changed, I am going to be better than that. All these benefits you won't get under their side. Because not only do they remove monuments of oppressors, which you think at least some good, they also remove monuments of people who were minority leaders, people who had a fight in the Civil War. These are all things that if though, for example, they give the most power to these individuals and minorities, you remove the only solace that they have. We really don't know what they have, then like you remove everything that literally they have. But also they say that look, oh yeah, I'll take you first too.
So whether or not those minority groups rally around and find positive meaning in those monuments is highly dependent on the lens in which they read it. So but what constructs the narrative and the lens that they view it through are all the power structures that be. Can you tell us whether or not they'll be able to view it as an empowering notion or whether it will be turned against them?
But your power structure also corrupts the discussion that you have. Your power structure also corrupts whatever narrative that you have. The only thing that matters is what those minorities feel of things that empowers them. So if these minorities at one point of time feel that a statue of Amrit doesn't empower them, maybe later down in the lane they will feel that a statue of Patrick empowers them. You must have different statues, as many statues as possible, so that at any point of time, if the narrative or the dominant oppressors feel a way of oppressing them, they can move on to another one. On that side, they have none. Yes, don't do this, it's a scale. So ultimately, let's talk about the fact that they say racist becomes more racist. Yeah, we know, we can't change their minds, but your side makes it worse, and that's a burden that you must protect. Removing them gives them more aggravation. Removing them allows them to access, you know what they call a victim card. The idea of saying that these are people who remove my statue and whatever idol that I think they have. This is what empowers them to go on offensive, what was previously something that they had and discuss privately among messages. Now they go out there, go on 4chan, go on whatever outright messages that you have, and then say and voice it out. They form stronger solidarity that they feel that they say is oppressing them. And that's the greatest, well, nice word, necessarily into my extension, or what it means for them to have distrust with the state. We think that their construction of the national identity, or at least having a harmonious society, is what? That sends an insidious message that your identities or your own points of empowerment are obstructing my path to reaching that. Meaning to say that you relegate and you, like, depreciate every single individual's identity to nothing more than oppressors. You tell them that these individuals, in order for us to reach some national identity, have to compromise for the state. You tell them that what you have right now might be good for you, but it's not good for everyone in the world. Your memories, basically the state is telling you, are hindering the progress of my state. This is necessarily what turns people against them. It's not only the minorities, mind you, your biggest will also turn against the state. Whatever reconciliatory messages that you have now, the intention doesn't matter. It's the outcome. Because to them, you remove their only solidarity point. To them, you remove whatever form of monuments that they have. This means that anything that you want to push through, any positive messages that you have, is harder to penetrate them. The animosity will increase, and ultimately, when animosity increases, they're unable to necessarily reconcile. To them now, when you remove all elements of monuments, they will always treat each other with caution. They'll always view each other as people who somehow caused my monument to be removed. This means that any form of rallying point that you have on your side can't happen. In fact, you turn everyone against each other. We think opening opposition was very charitable in this debate. We give you the fact that there are 4 different monuments. There are war monuments and memorials one. There are resistance monuments. There are also monuments that celebrate individual achievements of people who were heroes for that particular community. And we also have colonial and oppressive periods. We think that all of this might be good or might be bad. But what we think is going to be important is the fact that they exist, so that at least they are physical representation and there's something that you know you can't just copy, paste, control, delete. There's something that you have to literally remove. And when that removal is done, I'm pretty sure they will be pleased. And we want them to be pleased because that's something that they represent truly to the heart. Very proud.
Great. I thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that speech and call for the Member of Government here.
The world is plagued by simplified realities. Stereotypes, advertisements, fake news, all these things reduce our discussions about complex issues into very minute symbols. We think that we must destroy and abolish all sorts of monuments, and we'll deal with that in my extension. But first, I will deal with the speaker before me in 3 issues. Then I will extend by saying that the pursuit of truth is diminished as a result of the existence of monuments. But let's deal with with passion, right? So the first thing that we have to deal with is this whole distrust of the state. But let's look at the true premise of having a monument to begin with. That the creation of a monument is to celebrate one value over the other. We think that you generate more distrust every time you allow someone to create a monument because you are celebrating someone compared to someone else. This means that someone will always be put down in your world. Someone will always have a reason to have backlash in your world. In our world, there's actually more trust because the symbolic action of abolishment in and of itself is powerful in saying that we treat all of you equally. This means that every single person, no one is more celebrated than the other, and no one is more diminished than the other. There's more trust in our world than yours. But here's the second thing, right? So they try to bring a comparative and push us towards journals. And we accept that opening government did explain it's about that journals are a lot better, right? Journals are peer reviewed, journals are more respected, and your intellectuals are able to have a safe space in which to discuss through journals and respond to each other through journals. We also say it's about ordinary discussions, right? Ordinary discussions in your world are a lot more diminished because if it's true that Patrick said that such great power to monuments, then there's no response on your side, right? Every response is discredited in your world on ordinary conversations, right? You always tie back to the thing that you saw in your childhood or the thing that you feel like is so respected, right? The problem in your ordinary discussions is that the N-word is tied to a monument that you respect, like Cecil Rhodes. We think that ordinary discussions are harmed on your side, journals are harmed on your side. You can never respond to a monument because it's so powerful in people's minds. But here's where I talk to you about the rallying point, right? We think that the value in responses and in fair discussions is something that we have on our side. Because, like, even if it means that we are defending like oppressive people or people who are oppressed, right? We think that there's value in someone actually responding to us and being able to engage in that discussion. However, you aren't able to engage in the discussion because rallying points literally put you on one end of the scale and one end of the other. People don't recognize the scale on your side, whatever that means, Patrick. We a lot of people end up only forcing themselves into the visceral image of one side or the other, and you won't allow anyone to attack your very valuable and amazing monument. We think that takes out the opening opposition. But here's where I deal with my extension. We think that the pursuit of truth is diminished as a result of these monuments. Let's look at the OG premise, right? OG explained to you that they are more likely to be oppressive than liberating, and all their arguments are contingent on this, that like reminders or use of political power and legitimization, all these things are valuable in OG, but we think that on our closing side, we're going to deal with any kind of monument. So opposition can say that they are more likely to be good than bad, some that are good. We think that in actual fact, any monument diminishes that discussion, that any kind of interpretation that you had as a result is harmful. And I'll deal with this in several ways. We think that the impact to this motion is that these decisions and understandings of the truth should be complex. They should be multidimensional. They should be constantly, you're constantly able to be responded to, and you can increase in depth. The problem with monuments is that it simplifies these realities and you are unable to increase the depth because you already have a fixed mindset of what it looks like, right? We think that the formula of chemicals used in the Holocaust, the nuances of Mao Zedong's like personality that was at once great but also really terrible. These are things that people don't accept. People think it's a black and white good versus evil. We think the problem of the immortalization of every monument means that you are fixed with a perception of what the issue is and what it truly is, right? We think that forgetfulness is in fact important because you are able to develop your ideas more often without always tying it back to the past, right? We think that it's exactly that problem that you fail to miss, that you always miss out, right? Because there's an immediate association every time you think about the issue. Every time you think about the issue, you're already reminded of the image of that, right? It's really simple to believe that like Jesus is always white because every single day of your life you see Jesus as white. That heroes must always be male because you're always told that heroes are male. Every monument has a male hero in it, right? Regardless of whether or not it's oppressive or not oppressive, the fact that you can't develop your ideas to begin with is something that's harmful, right? This means that even if you know all the true facts of Jesus being Middle Eastern, you still always imagine Jesus as white. You can't imagine it outside, right? In our world, you might have pictures of it in history books, but at least like that will be forgotten, and eventually the next generation can create more innovation in believing in different values.
I'm gonna ask like a very funny one, but like why can't we just change that business? Like, is it that difficult to do?
No, but then you won't get your benefit of having it really powerful because if you every time you change it, it does different values. We it's easier to like create different positions in people, right? But the truth is that we want to change people. People shouldn't stay stagnant where they are. However, they always change to the positions that they originally took because of the monuments that they already believe are valuable. Sure.
Yes, complex ideas are inaccessible. People often don't opt into them. Isn't simplifying monuments the first step for engagement, for media companies, for everyone to get involved, to get your complex discussion that you want?
No. The idea isn't to avoid the complex discussion. It's exactly what you're doing. We're simplifying it, right? The idea is to expose people to more complex discussions or allow people to respond whenever there is a discussion, right? You shouldn't run away from the truth. This means that people this constantly, you must remove the first barrier first. You must respond to the monument first before you can get to the actual discussions. That's really horrible. It means that people literally have to take 7 steps before they can convince someone, right? We think that the ability to convince someone take your position requires less animosity, requires the initial barriers to be taken down before you can have productive discussions. We think that in your world, you'll always have to defend the idea that you have to go through that barrier first before entering into discussions, right? The realities are ones that we have always had problems with. The fact that Donald Trump got elected to power is because people don't understand things. Because people are too used to the crutch of having visual, of having memes, all these things. We simplify reality. But also all our world, you begin to break down that barrier. You begin to get people to get used to seeing things in a more complex light, seeing things as not just black and white.
Great.
Elbrus.
Cool. Thank the member of government for that speech and call for the member of opposition here.
This is my attempt to pretend with culture. Right? To quote Shelley's sonnet. I don't know what Shelley, but some Shelley's sonnet. Wandering traveller comes across a majestic statue in the middle of the desert. On it, the description reads, roughly, okay, my name is Ozzy Mandaya, King of Kings, look upon my conquest at MIDP and his death. Nothing beside remains. What we need to understand is that all statues are subjectively interpreted based on surrounding context, and these contexts change through time. You cannot tell me that those things don't change. The fact that we can change, that the statues can be subjectively interpreted, means that there's an opportunity to reshape discourse and narrative. This is how, on International Women's Day, feminists enacted a statue of fearless girl in front of the raging bull in the streets of New York, which proves that it's not necessarily even the case that when you have a democratic discourse, the discourse is only hijacked by the majority. It's possible for determined vocal minorities as well as moderates to push forth different versions of interpretation and for the discourse to happen in the public limelight, right? The effect of the statue of fearless girl was to spark public outcry, draw attention to gender inequality in the corporate sphere. The discourse which was silenced for the past 200, since the beginning of time, basically, right? So that's why it's important that these statues which are prominent, which are in your face, which are public symbols. It's important to have that emotion, for those symbols to be the center of controversy. Because the fact that they're center of controversy means that they'll always be subject to fluid discussion and disagreement, which is why you can never have a monopoly, a single actor can never monopolize that interpretation. The comparative on your side is out of sight, out of mind. Removing monuments is what's going to silence discourse and relegate them to the backwaters of history museums and textbooks, right? Which are equally subjective to oppressive powers, like the companies that fund think tanks and all the stuff that we already talk about. So debaters and nerds will read these things, historians and academics will read these things. The average person will find these things inane. This rational, less emotional discourse will have something that nobody bloody cares about. The Mongol kopitiam uncle, the Mongol auntie, the redneck Republican, and all other members, random people always appear in my debate speeches, are going to look at your media and tabloids, right? So I don't understand how you achieve anything. In fact, on outside, we think they are natural checks and balances, right? Because some monuments, which are really horrible, will go down in the place, like Saddam Hussein, after Iraq war. People just want to tear him down. B, you can have a plebiscite, you have a referendum. And I understand that. So I don't understand why people doing that fiat to unilaterally remove monuments, which may be revered by the overwhelming majority of this concept. I understand on our side we are subject to the tyranny of majority and the opportunistic interpretations. But I have two responses. First of all, right, the majority is also becoming increasingly liberal and enlightened, and very often you have moderates who are sympathetic towards vocal minorities. So give you the example of like Maryland, which is the capital city of Confederates. They've created not only an entire slave trail to document the experience of actual slaves and to remind us of horrible things that happened, but also a counter monument called Reconciliation, two states hugging each other to try and combat, to provide a different version of events as compared to just the Confederate general statue, right? B, we think that more importantly, like you guys yourselves admit that removing statues isn't going to change people's minds.
Yeah.
So it's ineffective and counterproductive. If the problem is oppressive interpretation, abolishing the monument immortalizes those misconceptions.
Yeah.
Makes them impossible to change because continue to hold on to the sense of nostalgia of victimhood against an oppressed state. They continue to believe that they are right. This is why it's counterproductive. Like, if you take an example of the Confederacy, really, like, the problem isn't just that there are these generals. The problem is this thing called the lost cause myth, where the white Southerners who are so proud that grand statues of Confederate generals cling on to the idea that the Civil War wasn't about slavery, but that these generals were heroes against an oppressive North, which sought to oppress their Southern heritage. So yes, this because exists. My question is, what happens even after you remove the statue? These people are going to change their minds about these Confederate generals. In fact, it's going to make that conception impossible to influence or to have counter narratives. It's impossible for you to erect a different statue, impossible to change the inscription on that statue, impossible for you to have discourse about what those statues should mean that can hopefully provide sunlight and be the best disinfectant. Right? So like at the end of the day, like, I think like let's move on to my extension. I think there are two things we need.
Look, social movements can coalesce and can gain public attention all the time, irrespective of the context, as long as they garner enough attention through the media or acts that they do in the real world. Can you tell us, if people can't do rallying cries in your minorities, wouldn't after 2 or 3 generations your conservatives not have rallying cries as well?
None of these progressive movements, right, go to the media and historians to try and get their point across. They rally around like prominent statues and circles, so that's where they get the most attention. Right? Let's move on to my extension. I think it's important for us to be self-aware because debaters very often are. One day, future generations will look back at us and blame us for our atrocity. They'll say like, well, people of the 21st century, but then responsible for not being vegetarian, driving species to extinction, not intervening with Rwanda and Syria allowing those people to die. But what do we hope is our legacy for the future, right? We want them to also emulate our greatest accomplishments of our time, to remember that we gain greater universal suffrage for all races and women, that we legalize gay marriage, that we're responsible for greater democratic and civil liberties as lessons for our future generations. Sure, we are going to have a mixed legacy just as our predecessors, but it's important for our struggles to be documented and not simply taken for granted. It's important for future generations to gain a better understanding of what we went through, and that can only be possible if these things are documented in a public space where everyone is forced to be exposed to it all the time. Next extension. This is something I don't understand why we need to talk about. We think there's like implicit value in these monuments that is undeniable. After Singapore got kicked out of Malaysia, Lee Kuan Yew did 2 things. First, he pretended to cry. Secondly, a statue of Sir Stamford Raffles as a signal to Britain that we are open for business. This is what created trade and diplomatic ties with the UK to tell Singaporeans that we should not be resentful, but should be proud of our colonial history. And that's why we are one of the few colonies who experience economic success compared to all the other colonial states. Yes, we agree, the state sometimes uses these monuments to forward their own agenda. But we think it's unfair for government to claim that these agendas are always evil, because in democratic societies, these states are likely representative of their people's best interests. The power structures don't have the oppressive, they can also similarly be benign. Next, I think we also need to recognize that some of these monuments are not just like symbols of history, they're symbols of your culture and heritage, your religion, your value of filial piety. Right? If you talk about like the Yasukuni Shrine, yes, I understand there are some war criminals there, but at the end of the day, it's also a celebration of like millions of people who served the Japanese people, who created the country which exists today, and people value those things. We don't think it's democratic, we don't think it's just for government just take that away from the Japanese people. Very, very problem.
Great. I thank the member of opposition for that speech and call upon the government whip to close the Govt bench. Here.
Speaker. Maintaining these horrible monuments oftentimes only solidify the power the oppressors have over the oppressed. I will first deal with the speaker before me. It is important to note that the only response that we got is that from closing opposition is that people will forget about these oppressions, but it's quite funny to note that the position is that the oppressors will remember. I see some kind of inconsistency over there. So given that, so they claim that there is a changing narrative, for example, the fearless girl that creates discourse, but oftentimes the people that dominate the discourse are the oppressors. Oftentimes people have a lot of difficulty fighting against the dominant narrative because you have a lot of mudslinging going around. You have a lot of misinformation to overcome. Before you can get to the core of the problem, oftentimes with these monuments, you don't get a lot of nuanced discussions with just a statue with not a lot of details on it. Right. So do people really not care about rational discourse? Maybe. But it is important to note that because of the misinformation in the status quo, oftentimes this discourse goes in the wrong direction. People don't have very good outcomes. So maybe we have less people caring about rational discourse, but it's comparatively better than having to clean up a lot of misinformation. Under our side, at least we have more productive discussions going on. So on the point of the Maryland slave trails, I don't think it's going to be productive because when you have those kind of slave trails, you continuously remind African Americans of the trauma that they went through. You continuously solidify the power of the oppressors. What is that going to do for the morale of every BLM member that attends a rally and risk their lives? No, you only solidify the historical oppression that they went through. It's quite funny to note that nostalgia was an issue that they brought up because oftentimes you get nostalgia more with statues around because when people so openly glorify statues, when people look at statues and get a visceral reaction, that is the point at which you believe in that nostalgia even more. You have less of that nostalgia when you're not constantly reminded by those statues. So are these legacies really going to be, are these positive legacies going to be needed? Sorry, are these legacies, do these legacies need these monuments? We don't think so. First response is we have education, we have textbooks. We can educate people on what happened in the past. No. Secondly, there are laws to govern social norms, laws to tell us what to do and what not to do. And maybe Singapore is an exception when it comes to the economy, but oftentimes most monuments that they bring up are horrible because the monuments in Japan glorify literally the people that enslaved women, that made women their comfort women, that beheaded people, that perpetuated the worst kinds of atrocities. You have monuments that glorify those kinds of individuals in Japan.
So, if you talk about monuments were horrible, your only point at this point in the debate, wouldn't it be worse in a world in which you remove that people don't have active opposition and rallying in opposition to it because misinterpretations happen easier in your world and are harder to correct?
Misinterpretations happen more easily in a world in which the message of the monument is more easily perverted by the majority, especially given the analysis that Felice told you just now. No, but what did Felice say? Because Felice told you that under their side, they reduce complex issues into very simplistic symbols. When you glorify one party, you are diminishing the idea and the meaning of another. At least when we remove and abolish these monuments, it acts as a sort of equalizer, right? So the ordinary discussion that we have, so to every response to dominant narrative under their side is nullified by what is ingrained into the minds of people for centuries.
On the point of rallying points, it's not very useful for rallying points because when people are demotivated, when you solidify the power of the oppressors, that is the point at which people feel like there's no use joining BLM movements. So reducing complex discussions is not helpful in that sense, right? So we need complex, multi-dimensional discussions to happen for actual progress to actually to happen. So in addition to that, Felice told you that it's important that people are able to form their own perceptions. Because comparatively, in a world in which the most perceptions are formed by monuments, what you have is a lot of preconceived notions that aren't nuanced, and people aren't exposed to the complexities that come about, right? You provide a barrier in pursuit of the truth. Therefore, a lot of misinformation is exposed to these people, and this kind of misinformation, regrettably, is very dominant. Donald Trump was able to lie his way into power because he utilized monumental lies. He made the American people believe that there was a glorious task in America that would do the Americans great if they were to get back to. That is the sort of risk you have when you have monuments perpetuating lies. No, sit down. Now let's move on to OO. Is it harder to oppose oppression under our side? We don't think so, because the monuments present an active glorification and perpetual solidification of their power. We celebrate the bringing down, the falling of the Cecil Road statue, because that in and of itself symbolic is a symbolic representation of disrupting the power structure that enslaved African Americans. The presence of this statue perpetuates the symbolic power of the oppressor. And that is the point in which minorities are unlikely to fight the good fight close it down, because on a visceral level, they've already lost. This monument solidified the oppression felt by the whole community. The Martin Luther King Memorial gives people a false impression that African Americans are already fully emancipated. Oftentimes, when you over-glorify these instances, people then forget about the struggles that are still ongoing. Even if you don't believe that, the allies that would otherwise support Martin Luther King are also turned away because they think, if Martin Luther King was able to achieve all these great successes, it means that African Americans are fully emancipated at this point. Are monuments incorruptible? They are incorruptible, and we've given you multiple layers of analysis as to why. The kind of corrupted information that these monuments provide, you then make this cost even worse and unproductive. In a world in which you have more statues, that's the point in which you demotivate minorities, you solidify the oppressive power structure that the oppressors have. Very proud to you.
Great. I thank the government whip for that speech and call upon the opposition whip to close the debate. Hear, hear.
Recognize that and these are more than just commemorative. Be faceted meanings and represent and signify and create a certain historical narrative. Time with the historic, with the sociological environment that these monuments evoke. We think that ultimately in the present day, we need to examine these monuments independent of the implications that they had in the past, which is exactly what we try to talk about. Because at the end of the day, we don't think that what closing says is correct, right? Where they don't want to have a changing value of these monuments. Because monuments change over time because people change, right? And you can't have the same person, different people thinking exactly the same thing. That's just very silly. So because of that, right, we think that it's very illogical for their side to come out and claim day, there are monuments that have this sort of historical oppression that continue to live on till today. Ultimately, what we brought is that first of all, many monuments are a source of pride. But at the same time, while some monuments may be a source of pride, they are also a reminder of the awful past in the past. And precisely because of that, that is important because human beings learn from experience, and these monuments are a physical manifestation of these experiences of the past that we want to learn from, whether be positive or negative.
Rachel.
No, thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about like this value of monuments, right? So what did Govt talk about today? So Govt basically came out and asserted in opening that, because of visceral imagery, therefore we should remove. I think that they never ever provided us with any form of counterfactual about how removing changes mindsets for individuals. I think Alfred was very charitable to them early in the speech so that they can respond, but then they don't want to respond, right? So anyway, we think that we have to recognize that our counterfactual ultimately has to be dealt with. And that when you remove this sort of oppressive sort of monuments, this ultimately creates a worse situation on their side of the house. Not only because of whatever that opening said that, history, textbooks will be manipulated, but more importantly, thank you, because of the fact that these people no longer have any form of public space for them to then go to rally. And that was what we brought to you from closing. No, thank you. Then we look at what the closing does say, which is actually quite repetitive to the opening, right? So they basically talk about how it becomes more. They under their side they have more truth, but we don't think that you create more truth by removing the things. No, thank you. That are basically neutral and can be re-examined across time, and therefore there's no such thing as when you remove the monuments, therefore you have more truth. Okay.
Before you
then
go.
No. Then now let's talk about opposition, right? Why we are better than opening opposition. So we feel that we are better than opening opposition because what they did was they talked about how basically it's possible for interpretations to be changed over time, which is true. But they never really provided us with any form of valuable mechanism, which is what Alfred talked about. So thank you. What did Alfred tell you? Alfred told you that you have that monuments are in prominent spaces, which then create discourse. Alfred told you that monuments evoke some sort of emotional response, which then sparks controversy, which is why when he responded to Lisa's point that these exact monuments are the reasons why social activism movements that they want to push for only exist in our side. Yes.
So you can protest to block roads, hospitals, schools, and cause practical impacts and inconveniences to gain all the attention that you want without any of the interpretive risk that comes along with your particular monuments. Why is your benefit mutually exclusive?
It's mutually exclusive. I think at least on your side also, right? This protest still continue on your side, whether with or without monuments. Okay. So then let's deal with what Alfred comes from. So ultimately, right, Alfred substantive also with the response entirely without case, which is that there's some sort of manipulation of power and all that. Right? We think that at the end of the day, right, Alfred already told us that you cannot possibly have monopoly. Precisely because there's it's existing in such a private public space, and therefore there cannot be monopoly. But more importantly, we think that even if the government necessarily has some sort of monopoly, it doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing all the time. We talk to you about Singapore, which they say is an exception. We tell you that it's just in status quo today, right? There are democratic checks and balances to ensure that the government no longer misuses power. But more importantly, that even if here, is that we think that at the end of the day, right, monopolies exist with or without monuments. And it's simply unfair for them to come and claim that by removing these monuments, the government will then not have a monopoly over interpretations of the past of history of experiences. Because at the end of the day, these sort of past and histories are the ones that are the governments are the ones shaping it. And if their alternative is to provide some sort of historical narrative provided by the government, we think that it's so much more susceptible to abuse as compared to without a monument, which is already there to begin with. We told you from closing, so thank you, that these sort of monuments can then erect plaques and signs and whatever, and these are valuable things about the monuments, which then allow for them to be reinterpreted in different lenses. No, thank you. Finally, we tell you that we have to recognize what Alfred talked about also, right? That in today's society, there is a large majority of sympathetic, moderate people. Something that closing never wanted to engage with us about. And we think that that's where we also distinguish ourselves. No, thank you for opening, because this sympathetic majority are extremely important in this context that we're talking about today. Whether be in post-conflict states or whether be in developed countries. In developed countries, they are more than mature enough to understand. Their only response is, oh, you see, but then they voted in Donald Trump. We say, okay, sure, so people always exist, but at the very least, when you have moments there, no, thank you, there's also some sort of discourse to be made amongst these stupid people. And we think that ultimately, when stupid people right? But what happens when you have some sort of discourse, right? That like clever things outweigh the stupider things, and therefore you have a better outcome in the long run. Ultimately, we think that like for example, look at the Holocaust museum, right? Never again. This solidifies the form of historical regret that exists in society today. And because of this, we think it's extremely important for us to recognize that these sort of monuments are extremely important to serve as a reminder of the past. Then we deal with closing opposition, right? Like I really think that the main thing that they have is like, oh, they are bad. Like monuments create some sort of reactive response. We think that that's just not true, right? Because monuments allow individuals, because the monuments are there for a long, long time, to exercise agency over a period of time because of the exact visceral imagery, to then look at these monuments and then decide of what sort of interpretations they want to have. We think it's problematic for them to come out and claim that they will be reactive and at the same time have some sort of monopoly and influence over the interpretations of the monuments, because it's problematic, right? And more importantly, we turn it on our side. We allow for a diversity of interpretation precisely because these monuments are in the public space and allow to be discussed not only in the public space, also in the internet across borders and like globally. And as a result of that, right, we don't think it's possible or okay for them to then claim that removing these monuments will then shut off all sorts of like negative discourse. But rather than that, it solidifies any form of echo chamber that already exists in society, and for all these reasons, I oppose.
Thank you. Where do we go?
Just find a room. How many later? I think there's going to be rooms open.